I broke the village rule. Now the curse hunts my family. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm sharing a story that was sent to me directly by someone who experienced something absolutely terrifying. A curse that doesn't just affect one person, but spreads through an entire family like a disease with no cure. This is the account of someone who broke a village rule, something that seemed innocent at the time, something that seemed like superstition and folklore. But that one action triggered something that has haunted his family for over a decade. The story takes place in a small village in the Cordillera region of the Philippines, in an area where old traditions run deep and where people still understand that some rules exist for reasons that go beyond simple superstition. By the end of this video, I'll explain the cultural and spiritual significance of village rules in the Philippines and why breaking them can carry consequences far beyond what most of us in the modern world would ever imagine. But first, let me tell you what happened when one man decided that old traditions didn't apply to him anymore. My name is Daniel. That's not my real name, but I need to keep my identity private for reasons that will become clear. I'm a Filipino Canadian, born in Canada to immigrant parents, but with family still living in a small village called Dampog in the Cordillera region of Benguet province. The village sits high in the mountains, surrounded by thick forests and terrain that seems almost untouched by the modern world. Maybe 2,000 people live there, all interconnected by family or blood relation, all bound by traditions that have existed for generations. I didn't grow up in Dampog. I was raised in Vancouver by my parents, who had left the village in the 1980s, seeking better opportunities. I visited occasionally as a child, but my strongest memories are from my teenage years, when I spent 2 summers in the village with my cousins. By the time I was 18, I had all but forgotten about Dampog. It seemed like a relic of my past, a place that belonged to my parents' generation, not to someone who had grown up in modern Canada. But in 2011, my father became ill, cancer. When he passed away in 2012, my mother wanted to return to Dampog for an extended period. She wanted to be close to her family, wanted to grieve in the place where she'd grown up. She convinced me to come with her for a few months. I was reluctant. I had a job, a life in Vancouver, but I owed my father that much. I took a leave of absence and flew back to the Philippines with my mother. That decision would change everything. The village hadn't changed much in the 20 years since I'd last visited. The same narrow roads, the same wooden houses, the same sense of being separated from the modern world. My mother's family welcomed us warmly, and we settled into my grandmother's house, a traditional structure made of hardwood and thatch, with a kitchen that still used a wood-burning stove. Within a few days, I had fallen back into the village rhythm. Early mornings, simple meals, long afternoons, listening to my relatives tell stories about village life. It was peaceful in a way that Vancouver never could be, but it was also boring. I missed the internet, missed television, missed the constant stimulation of city life. I also noticed something immediately. There were rules, unspoken rules that governed village behavior. Rules about where you could walk at certain times of day. Rules about which areas of the forest were forbidden. Rules about how you spoke to elders, how you conducted yourself in public, what you could and couldn't do on certain days of the week. My grandmother explained some of them to me, but not all. Some rules you don't need to understand, she said in Ilocano, the language of our region. You just follow them. They protect us. Protect us from what? I asked, thinking she was being dramatic. She didn't answer directly. There are things in the mountains that our people have learned to live with. The rules are how we keep the peace with them. I didn't take her seriously. I was a Canadian. I believed in science, in rational explanations, in the idea that superstition was something uneducated people believed in, not something that actually affected reality. That arrogance would cost my family everything. About 2 weeks into our stay, I was restless and bored. The village was beautiful, but there was nothing to do. My cousins had to work. My mother was occupied with her grief and family obligations, and I was left with long stretches of empty time. I decided to go hiking. There was a trail that led up into the mountains behind the village, a route that supposedly led to a waterfall. My cousin Maria had mentioned it one evening. The waterfall is beautiful, she'd said, but you shouldn't go alone, and you should never go during the afternoon or evening. And there are certain parts of the trail you should avoid. Why? I'd asked. She'd hesitated, uncomfortable with the question. Just don't go past the old stone markers. That's where the rules get strict. Again, she wouldn't explain. Nobody in the village would give me a straight answer about why these rules existed. They just said I should follow them, with this vague sense of danger if I didn't. This annoyed me. I was 32 years old, educated, and rational. I wasn't going to let village superstition dictate where I could and couldn't hike. So, the next morning, I packed a backpack with water and snacks, and I set out on the trail. The early morning was beautiful, mist rising through the trees, birds singing, the air cool and fresh. The trail was well marked at first, easy to follow. I hiked for about 45 minutes without incident, enjoying the exercise and the fresh air. Then I reached what my cousin had mentioned, old stone markers, stacked in cairns, marking what seemed to be a boundary. They were ancient, covered in moss, clearly placed there a very long time ago. Beyond them, the trail continued into thicker forest. This was the rule I'd been warned about. Don't go past the markers. Stay on the main trail. I stopped for a moment, actually hesitating. But then my rationalism kicked back in. These were just rocks. The superstition around them was just fear, perpetuated by generations of people who didn't have education or scientific understanding. I stepped over the markers and continued on the trail. The forest beyond the markers felt different, darker, despite the morning light filtering through the canopy. The sounds of birds seemed to diminish. The air felt heavier, and there was a smell, something vaguely like earth and rot, like the smell of a very old forest that had been undisturbed for centuries. The trail continued for another 20 minutes, and then I reached the waterfall. It was indeed beautiful, a cascade of water falling down a cliff face into a pool below, surrounded by moss-covered rocks and lush vegetation. I spent some time there, took photographs with my phone, and felt satisfied that I'd broken the village rule and suffered no consequences. I should have known better. In that moment, not experiencing immediate danger, I foolishly believed I'd proven the village rule to be meaningless superstition. It was the worst mistake of my life. I returned to the village by early afternoon, not telling anyone where I'd been. My mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner. My grandmother was resting. My cousins hadn't returned from work yet. I said nothing about my hike, convinced that if I didn't mention it, nobody would know. That night, I had a strange dream. I was in the forest, on the trail beyond the markers, but it was night. The darkness was absolute, and I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. I was walking toward the waterfall, but the trail seemed longer than it had been in reality, stretching endlessly into darkness, and I could sense something following me. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I could feel its presence, something massive, something breathing. I woke up gasping, my heart racing. It was just a dream, brought on by the guilt of breaking the village rule, I told myself. Just my subconscious processing the fear I'd been told about but didn't consciously believe in. The next morning, my grandmother asked me where I'd gone the day before. Just for a walk, I said evasively. She studied me carefully, and something in her expression changed. You went to the waterfall, didn't you? I was startled. I hadn't told anyone. How did you? I can see it on you, she said, and her voice was completely serious now, all the usual warmth gone. There's something attached to you now. You broke the rule. You went past the markers, and now something has taken notice of you. Grandmother, that's not... Don't speak, she interrupted, her voice sharp. Come with me. She took me to the small shrine that every Filipino household maintained, a small alcove with an image of Jesus and various saints, candles, flowers. My grandmother lit several candles and made me kneel while she whispered prayers in Engkanto, prayers I couldn't quite hear, prayers for protection or purification or something else entirely. When she finished, she turned to me with an expression of deep worry. You need to go back to that place and apologize. You need to ask forgiveness from the spirits of that land. You need to go during the day, during the afternoon when the sun is high, and you need to bring an offering. An offering of what? I asked, feeling ridiculous even asking the question. Food, meat, something of value, and you need to speak to whatever is there. You need to tell it that you didn't know the rule, that you respect its domain, that you ask permission to return and to live in this village. I wanted to argue, to explain that I didn't believe in any of this, that there was no spirit in the forest that required offerings. But something in my grandmother's face stopped me. She was genuinely frightened, not in an exaggerated, performative way, but with the deep fear of someone who understood something about reality that I didn't. I promised her I would go back and perform whatever ritual she wanted. I had no intention of actually doing so, but I told her what she wanted to hear. That night, my mother came to me with the same concern. My grandmother had told her about my broken rule. My mother, who had raised me in Canada, who was educated and rational like me, was also worried. You should apologize to the spirits, she said. Just do it. It won't hurt, and it might help. Mom, you don't actually believe in... I grew up in that village, she interrupted. I have seen things that I can't explain rationally, and I saw what happened to people who broke the rules. Just go back and apologize, please. Something in her voice convinced me, not that the ritual would actually accomplish anything, but that it would ease her worry. So I agreed, and the next afternoon, I packed some cooked meat and rice into a plastic container, walked back up to the waterfall, went past the stone markers, and left the offering on a rock near the water. I didn't speak to any spirit. I didn't say any prayers. I just left the food there, feeling foolish the entire time, and walked back to the village. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. That night, my cousin Manuel, my mother's brother's son, someone I was close to, got into a car accident. He was driving home from work when his truck suddenly swerved off the road for no apparent reason. He survived, but the truck was totaled, and he broke his arm in 2 places. He told the police and his family that he didn't know why the truck swerved. He said it felt like something had grabbed the wheel. The next day, my cousin Maria developed a severe fever. It came on suddenly, with no warning, and spiked so high that she was hallucinating. She was taken to the nearest clinic, which was an hour's drive away in the larger town. The doctors couldn't find any infection, any virus, any medical explanation for the fever. It broke after 2 days, and she recovered. But during those 2 days, she kept screaming about shadows in her room, about something crawling across her skin. Then my aunt, my father's sister, fell down the stairs in her house for no reason. She wasn't drinking, wasn't dizzy, just suddenly fell as if something had pushed her. These weren't life-threatening incidents, but they were unusual. They were concentrated, and they all seemed connected to my family. That's when my grandmother called a family meeting. Everyone gathered in her house: my mother, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, their spouses, their children, about 30 people in total. My grandmother explained to them all that I had broken the village rule, that I had gone past the forbidden markers in the forest. The reaction was immediate and intense. People weren't angry at me exactly, but they were frightened. They looked at me like I had brought something into their home, something dangerous that was now feeding on the family. The rule exists for a reason, my uncle said, his voice heavy with frustration and fear. There are things in that forest, old things, powerful things, that the village has learned to coexist with, as long as we respect the boundaries, as long as we follow the rules, there's peace. But when someone breaks the rule, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. What can we do? My mother asked desperately. There must be something we can do to fix this. My grandmother spoke up. There's a ritual, an old ritual, performed by the village leader and the albulario, a ritual of atonement and boundary restoration. We'll need to perform it, and it will need to involve Daniel and the entire family. It's the only way to break the curse. I'm not doing some ritual, I said, my Canadian rationalism flaring up one last time. There is no curse. These are just coincidences. The silence that followed my words was deafening. People stared at me with expressions of shock and dismay, as if I had just admitted to something far worse than breaking the rule. My mother grabbed my arm, her grip tight and painful. You will do whatever ritual your grandmother says, she said quietly, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard from her before. You will do it, and you will do it with respect, or so help me God, I will never speak to you again. I'd never seen my mother angry before. I'd never heard her speak to me that way. And for the first time since this started, I felt genuine fear. Not fear of supernatural curses, but fear of my family. Fear of what was happening to them because of what I'd done. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay, I'll do the ritual." The ritual took place 3 days later at dusk in a clearing in the forest, but not past the markers. The clearing was on the village side of the boundary, a sacred place where such rituals apparently took place. The village leader, an elderly man named Tomas, who served as the community's spiritual authority, was there. So was the albulario, a woman named Luisa, who had lived in the village for 68 years and served as its healer and spiritual practitioner. My entire family was present, all 30 of us. Luisa instructed me to walk to the center of the clearing and kneel. I did, feeling self-conscious and foolish, but also deeply uncertain now. Something about the fear in my family's eyes, the seriousness with which they all took this, made me question my rationalism. Tomas and Luisa performed a ceremony that lasted about an hour. There was chanting in a language I didn't recognize, not Ilocano, but something older, something that sounded like it came from the region's indigenous Ibaloy heritage. There were offerings of food, flowers, incense made from burning herbs. There was water, blessed water apparently, that was sprinkled on me and on the boundary markers. Throughout the ceremony, Tomas and Luisa spoke to something that I couldn't see. They explained that I had broken the rule unknowingly, that I had not meant disrespect, that I was asking forgiveness and permission to live in the village. They asked the spirits to accept the family's atonement and to release the curse that had been placed on them. As the sun set and the ceremony continued, something strange happened. The air around us seemed to change. It became heavier, thicker, almost like the air was becoming a physical presence. The forest around us, which had been full of the normal sounds of evening, went completely silent. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Complete silence. Then I heard it. A sound like wind, but directed, purposeful, moving through the clearing. And beneath the sound of wind, I heard something else. A voice or voices, speaking in that same ancient language. Not aggressive or angry, just speaking, communicating. Thomas and Luisa continued their ritual, and gradually the presence around us seemed to diminish. The air became lighter. The sounds of the forest returned. The ceremony ended. When it was over, Luisa came to me and placed her hand on my forehead. She was an old woman, her hands rough and weathered, and her touch was surprisingly warm. "It's done," she said in Ilocano. "The spirits have accepted the atonement. But understand this." She paused, meeting my eyes. "The curse isn't erased. It's suspended. The spirits have agreed not to hunt your family as long as you honor the boundaries and the rules. But if you or any of your family members break the rules again, the curse will return. And next time, it won't be warnings. Next time, it will be fatal." I nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but accept what I was hearing. For the remainder of my time in Dampog, another 2 months, nothing unusual happened. No more accidents. No more mysterious illnesses. Life returned to normal. I followed every rule, asked permission before going anywhere, and kept to the designated safe areas of the village. When I returned to Canada, the incident stopped completely. Life went on. I eventually forgot, or tried to forget, the entire experience. I told myself it had been a combination of cultural misunderstanding, stress, in coincidence. The ritual was just a way for the village community to process fear and uncertainty. But my family didn't forget. My mother called me regularly, always asking the same question. You're following the rules, aren't you? You're not going anywhere you shouldn't be going. I'm in Canada, Mom, I'd say. There are no rules here. The rules follow you, she'd respond. They're part of you now. Part of the family now. I dismissed her concerns as paranoia brought on by superstition. But then, 5 years later, something happened that made me reconsider everything. My mother called me at work, her voice panicked. My younger sister, my half-sister, born after I left the village, had been in a serious car accident. She was 17. She'd been driving to school when another car T-boned her vehicle at an intersection. She survived, barely. The doctor said she should have died. The impact should have been fatal. When I went to the hospital to see her, the first thing she said to me was, "Why are you cursed?" What? I didn't understand. When I was unconscious, she said, her voice shaky, I saw something. I saw a shape, something large and angry, standing over my car, and it was pulling away, like it was going to kill me. But then it saw something and stopped, like it realized it was making a mistake. A chill ran down my spine. My sister had never been to the village. She didn't know the story of the curse. She didn't know about the rule I'd broken or the ritual that had been performed. And yet she had experienced something that suggested the curse was real and that it had somehow protected her instead of harming her. After she recovered, I asked her to describe what she'd seen more carefully. She described a shape, massive, humanoid, but not quite human, with red eyes and an aura of ancient rage. She described it as being absolutely fixed on destroying her, and then suddenly stopping, as if remembering something, as if recognizing that she was off limits. That's when I finally understood. The ritual hadn't destroyed the curse. It had transformed it. The curse no longer hunted my family to punish my transgression. Instead, it stood guard over them, protecting them from harm because they were part of its domain now. We were bound to the village rule, bound to the spirits of that forest, and as long as we acknowledged that binding, we would be protected. But the protection came with a price I would understand more fully in the years to come. Over the next decade, I noticed a pattern. My family, my mother, my sister, my cousins, all experienced unusual protection. My mother survived a cancer diagnosis that should have killed her. My cousin Manuel recovered from his broken arm with no complications, despite doctors saying he would have permanent nerve damage. My sister walked away from accidents that should have been fatal, but we all lived with constant awareness. We all knew, on some level, that we were being watched. We all understood that we belonged to something larger than ourselves now. We could feel it sometimes, in coincidences that seemed too perfect, in dangers that seemed to appear and then vanish, in dreams that felt more real than waking life. And the rules, we all followed them now, without question. When I visited the village again, I never went past the markers. I always asked permission before entering sacred spaces. I always made offerings when appropriate. My entire family did the same. But more importantly, we understood that this curse, or blessing, depending on how you look at it, now extended beyond the village. The rules had become part of our DNA. My sister, despite living in Vancouver her entire life, somehow understood intuitively which places were safe and which weren't. My mother could sense when my family was in danger, sometimes before we even knew ourselves, and we've all accepted it. We've accepted that we're bound to something that most people in the modern world would call superstition, but which is actually far more real and powerful than anything rationality can explain. The worst part is knowing that if I just listened, if I just followed the simple rule and not gone past the markers, my entire family would be free. We wouldn't be bound to these rules, wouldn't be constantly aware of a presence watching over us, wouldn't have this strange burden of being protected by something ancient and incomprehensible. But we also wouldn't have the protection. And I've come to realize that without that protection, most of us would probably be dead. So the question that haunts me every day is this curse or is this salvation? And would I make the same choice again, knowing what I know now? The answer is, I don't know. I genuinely don't know anymore. This story illustrates something fundamental about Filipino culture and the cultures of many indigenous communities around the world. There are rules that exist not because of arbitrary tradition, but because they represent a negotiated peace between human society and the forces, whether spiritual, psychological, or something else entirely, that share the world with us. When we break these rules out of arrogance or ignorance, we don't just harm ourselves, we harm everyone connected to us. The curse that Daniel triggered didn't just hunt him, it hunted his entire family. And the only way to stop it was to accept a permanent binding to those rules, a permanent acknowledgement that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. The most terrifying aspect of this story isn't the supernatural elements, it's the permanence. Daniel didn't break a rule once and then return to normalcy. He broke a rule, and his entire family, and all their descendants presumably, will be bound by it forever. His sister, who never went to the village, who never broke any rule, will live her entire life with the knowledge of this curse. Her children, when she has them, will presumably inherit this binding as well. That's the true horror of breaking village rules. It's not just a personal consequence. It ripples outward, affecting everyone you love, everyone you're connected to, across generations and across geography. What do you think about this story? Do you believe in curses that extend across families? Do you think there's any validity to village rules and the supernatural consequences of breaking them? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have your own story about breaking a rule and experiencing consequences that seem to extend beyond simple cause and effect, I'd love to hear it. Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories from across Asia. Remember, some rules exist for reasons we might not understand, and sometimes the safest thing we can do is respect them, even when we can't explain why.